Hello and welcome to this week's Jump discussion. I've just been saying to the lads that every week we come on this, we're giggling before we come on. It's quite embarrassing, really, the amount of people that are giggling between the four of us before we start these webinars. So I'd like to thank everyone for coming in as people sort of log on as normal. The people are sort of queuing in as well and coming. Numbers are growing very, very quickly. Again, if you can hear us, please put a note in the chat bar or in the question bar, okay, so we can understand that people can actually hear us and we're not just talking to ourselves from there. Today, we're going to look at something sort of slightly different to what we normally look at. We're going to look today at the tangible assets. And it was quite interesting when we started talking about tangible assets. I thought, well, to me, a tangible asset is something that's physical, or a property that's owned by a company, something that can be seen. However, most recruitment agencies, other than really computer equipment and their office furniture, potentially some of them own their own burners, have very few tangible assets. However, obviously, through our experience and through working in various different markets, we work with lots of law firms, we work a lot with brokers who are actually buying and selling recruitment agencies. And they came up with the 10 tangible assets that they would look for when evaluating a business or preparing a recruitment agency for sale. And we thought at this moment in time in the marketplace, it would be ideal for us to actually talk about what those assets are. Because whether you desire to sell the business or not, we think it's a good idea you understand what assets will make your business more robust and help you sweat those assets, especially such times as this. We can't afford to leave anything on the table. So it's important that we actually start to learn to sweat the assets that we have. So ladies and gentlemen, let's push straight into it. We've got 10 that we think are primary for you. So I'm going to push you guys really, because for 10 minutes, 10 assets in 40 minutes, there's a lot of assets to get out there. Okay. And I know how we like to talk. So let's move straight into that. So the first asset that we're going to sort of look for and move on to is specialism and strength of brand. And Mr. Sharp, I think you were one person that wanted to come in and have a discussion on that one.
Yeah, sure. And I'll leave a little bit for Paul Jacobs to talk about, because I know he likes to talk as well. So I'll probably just focusing on the brand bit just for now. And I think what's happened in the market over the past 3-4 years is people have started to invest more in marketing, and recruitment companies are more invested in marketing. And I think from an investor perspective, I think understanding if you have a strategy, and if you have got a strategy, what does that strategy look like, and how invested are you in your brand, I think is, a couple of really important questions. And if we work on the premise that, what we're trying to achieve here in most instances is to drive traffic back to your website, then starting to understand what you measure and how you measure it is really important. And ultimately, I guess we're all looking for, most of us are looking for very, very similar things, which is to drive as much traffic back to your website as what we possibly can, and then trying to convert that traffic into candidates, and not just candidates, but candidates at your place. And if you're doing that, then you're becoming, less dependent upon the job boards. You're not pushing stuff out on LinkedIn, just advertising for people. And it starts to look and feel that you're quite different to other agencies. So I think, thinking about how invested you are in marketing, and by the way, I'm working with organizations where there's 3 recruiters in the business and 1 full-time marketeer. So, having a marketing presence or support is not just for the bigger organizations, by the way. And I think we've actually got 1, which is 1 person and 1 marketeer as well. So thinking about how you invest in that, I think is really important. Understanding what to measure, understanding what your audience is, what your audience looks like. Is it growing? Is it going back? Are your people engaged with you? What does your followers look like? What do your employees, how do they support brand advocacy? So are they all social and present? And what does that social and present look like? By the way, if anybody wants to speak to me separately, I've done an awful lot of work on brand advocacy, but in particular on LinkedIn, and how to beat this algorithm, or certainly sort of try and get more out of it, if anybody wants to pick my brains. And the last bit I'll just add before I hand it over to Mr. Jacobs is just around SEO. So brand is obviously about, you pushing out, but it's also about people finding you. So how much do you understand, and how much have you invested in SEO, and how easy is it for people to find you if they've got a need? Paul, do you want to, I may have missed something there, but do you want to hold me on this sort of specialism?
Yeah, a couple of things I'd just add to your point, Paul, and I think that you make the points very well, and I would add that I think you've got to be quite brave about your brand. It is an enormously important asset to the business, and making a decision on the look and the feel of the brand, the tone of voice that you use when you place posts and articles and roles on social media, for example, is extremely important. You know, we all of us understand when we look at the best brands in the world, we know who they are almost before the advert has got within 3 seconds in. You know, if you look at the color purple appearing on an advert on a TV, you almost instantly think it's Cadbury's. If you see a product that's white, immediately you think Apple. There is, to a large degree, an enormous level of public scrutiny and association with your brand. Don't underestimate the power of it. And therefore, I think being brave about how you use it and what you do with it becomes important. One of the things that I believe very firmly is that as owners of businesses, we are the guardians of our brand. So where you have your own people using the brand, make sure they conform to the brand guidelines. In other words, the same type facing, the same Pantone colors for the brand itself, and so forth. Just to pick up on the point about specialism, Paul, I think it's one of those overused words in our industry sector, and obviously we work with quite a lot of local businesses, generalist businesses, and whenever I talk to them about specialisms, they understandably blanch a little bit. Because when we think specialism, most people talk finance, IT, or whatever. But of course, there are some unbelievably good businesses out there, and I work with a number of them who are outstanding generalist recruiters. So what do we mean by specialism? I think specialism can easily mean you are the dominant provider of whatever staff you provide in your specific territory, for example. If you're in Bolton or you're in Glasgow, you're the best provider of those people in that specific territory. And that aligns, I think, very closely, which is why we've put these two things together, with strength of brand. How well regarded are you? How well renowned are you in your specific territory? So when we're talking about that, if you're looking particularly at exit, what are you known for? What are you going to have as your USPs? Why would anybody buy your business as opposed to any of the others that are potentially for sale as well? So I think when we're looking at that whole link between specialism, strength of brand, those two things, I think, link very well together.
I think when we look at that, and that specialism, that leads on to the sort of next sort of tangible that we thought is right there, that they look at that split between temp and contract, or temp and contract and perm. And it's important that when we start to look at that mix, they look at the way the business mix is important, and depending on who you speak to, the fluctuation sort of goes from sort of 60-40, 70-40, what have you. But basically having a good strong perm book and a good strong temp or contract book is very important when you start to look at what's going on. So if you're over temp heavy or over perm heavy, then it does affect the PE and how the PE is actually calculated by these people. But what you've got to start to think about, that if you're over perm heavy, what can you do to develop a temp or contract book? Because you'll have clients already that have a temp and contract operation that you're not capitalizing on. And it's the same when you start to look at that temp book. If you've got a huge temp book and a very small perm book, then again, you'll have people in your temp marketplace that will be doing perm placements that you're not capitalizing on. So you're actually leaving a massive amount of cash on the table from there. And when people start to sort of look at your business from a purchasing point of view, and they look at that tangible asset, they look at how much you're sweating that asset, and that client is an asset that you need to sweat. So if you're only moving the temp market or the contract market out of that client, then you're missing out on the perm market, and vice versa. If you're only sweating the perm market, you're missing out on the temp and contract market. So you've got to start to think about that and how that works and how that moves forward to ensure that you get the right mix in your business. Because once you have have the right mix in your business. And what most people say is that your temp and contract line should pay for the business, and therefore your perm will be pure profit. And if you can get that driven into your business, then all of a sudden you're in a far better place to sort of move forward. So we know that temp and contract is the thing that comes back and stays more stable throughout the economic cycle. We know perm fluctuates in that economic cycle. So having the right blended mix of both is really important. I know, PJ, you wanted to sort of come in on this one as well, didn't you?
Yeah, just to pick up on your point. I mean, often I talk with companies who are perm only, for example, and I always feel that's very dangerous. And we know that, and we're going through one at the moment, that if you're going through a period of economic downturn, then of course you see redundancies. I mean, it's rumored that we'll get up to about 7.5% unemployment in this country, maybe even a bit higher. And if you're a business that is entirely dependent on the perm market, you are running a huge risk, because at some point, because these things are cyclical, the perm market will just drop. And we know the counterbalance to that is the provision of temporary or contract labour. The other point, I think, is that if you are intent on ring fencing clients, in other words, owning, for want of a better word, a client, to the extent that you're moving away from contingent recruitment into exclusive retained business, you are compelled to go for contract, temp, and perm. If, as you point out, Howard, if you only have one element of that, you've left the back door wide open for your competitors to come in and provide staff to that client, which of course diminishes your chances of making perm placements, because your candidates then are competing with other competitors' candidates. So to own the client, you do actually have no choice. You have to do both, absolutely both. But when it comes to multipliers, when you come to sell a business that is a decent blend, a mix of perm and temp contract, will sell at a much higher price than a perm only business. Perm only multipliers are often around 1, 1.5, maybe 2. But if you are a business that provides a much broader range of services, including temp and contract, you can be pushing multipliers up to 5 to 7. So there's no question that it adds real value to your business.
Cabs, just a quick question. Howard, you talked about contract paying for the running the business, then the perm's your profit. I think you said that way around.
Yeah.
And sometimes we've talked about 2/3 contract and 1/3 perm. Do we think that those ratios and percentages are still relevant today?
I think it's still a relevant view of the marketplace. I think it's a thing that every client, if depending on the size of your business, it's what you should be driving towards. And I think it depends on the size of the business. I'm working with businesses at the moment that are obviously quite small, and what I'm saying is that if you're worried about your business, if your temp line is covering your cost of your business completely, then your perm becomes profit. As you start to grow, then obviously that will fluctuate, and depending on what you're doing, and you maybe want to flip that the way around, that your perm business. But what you've got to remember is that your perm business always starts at 0 every single month, where your contract business has already got a line of credit running. So if your line of credit is paying for your business when you don't have to do a single thing, you can flatline your business, then you're in a reasonable, strong position. And I think that's what we're sort of trying to drive towards, is that the ratios don't really matter at that point. What matters is that your temp line or your contract line is paying for your business right from the start of each individual month. Obviously, then you want to grow that and keep growing that, and then you start to look at the split and how that split works. But your profit comes from there. And to sort of give people a little bit more of a warm feeling, Paul mentioned there that they're aiming at, or they think they'll get to 7.5% unemployment. Got to remember, the beginning of the 90s, the unemployment ratio was over 10%.
Yeah.
So I started recruitment in the 90s. Okay, like Paul in the 1890s. Okay, you knew it was coming, Paul. And I had some massive years in the early parts of the 90s. So it's all about that. So let's move on to the next one, because obviously there's a lot to move through, and there's a lot of people sort of want to hopefully ask questions on this. So next one is profit trends. Morning, Mr. Pye. We've heard very little from you this morning, Mr. Pye. So, Mr. Pye, profit trends.
There's no room for me at the inn. I can't get a word in. Good morning, everyone. Yes, profit trends is an interesting one, because if ever you get involved in thinking about selling your business or going for an MBO or doing something that potentially involves you exiting in some way in parts, obviously profit is a key thing. And if you ever end up speaking to a corporate finance type company, they are going to use a phrase that every single corporate finance company I've ever spoken to uses, and that is, the trend is your friend. And what they mean by that is looking at how profitable your business is clearly important in the day-to-day running. But what they're looking at is, where is it now and where is it going? So if you've been profitable for 3 consecutive years, that's fantastic. But if in the next 3 months or the next 6 months, it looks like it's taking a dip, that's the trend that an outside investor or potential buyer, or even your own staff, if they're thinking about doing an MBA, it's that trend they're going to look at and go, well, that's fine for the last 2 or 3 years, but for the next 3 to 6 months, doesn't look as good. And therefore, it has an impact on the valuation. You'll also hear the phrase EBITDA, which is another corporate finance phrase, which is basically, it's the earnings of your business after interest, depreciation, and sometimes they add an R to the end of EBITDA, which is about restructuring, which is the cost of how much is going to cost us to do all of this. So we all know, running a business, that profit is important. That's just a given. But it's, where does the profit come from? How's it made up? Is it all from your big accounts? Is it from your permanent business? Is it from your international office as opposed to your UK office? And in that whole combination, what is the trend that's happening with that bottom line? Are you more profitable? Are you less profitable? And then you add in the macro bit. For example, the last 12 months, I think there are companies out there that if they can show that they've maintained or held their profit in the last 12 months versus the 2 years before, given the economic situation, then most people look at it and go, yeah, they've done very well.
It's quite, I was going to say, Paul, it's quite interesting. I had a client who'd had their business valued about 3-4 weeks ago. And what they were saying, the valuation of the business, they valuated the business with COVID and without COVID, based on profit trends from the year before of what the profit trend would be with or without COVID. So, you know, when they start to evaluate the business, they are looking at COVID as a single outlying point, and they're evaluating the business in that way. However, the trends through COVID and how you recover out of COVID will be really important to them. And I think when you start to look at your business, if you can then see what the trends are happening in your business by looking at your past data, then you can start to look at how you can sort of leverage your business moving forward.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that. I think that it's a very good point Dave made is looking at the rolling trends. And I think as a matter of course anyway, monitoring your business using 3-month rolling trends is always very useful. So, you know, we're in January. If I was looking at trends, I'd be looking at December, November, October versus September, August, July. And that's a rolling forward, 1 month forward. So you're always looking over the last 3 months, which is rolling. And you do the same when you're projecting forward. So it's that rolling 3 month. I think it's a really, really excellent level of scrutiny. And I've always done that with the businesses that I've worked within, because I think that understanding those instant trends, as Dave points out, is very, very important.
So let's get a shift on, guys, because we're running out of time. Okay, we're on 4, which is quality of management. I know Paul Jacobs, you wanted to come in on quality of management, so let's talk about quality of management.
So look, I mean, I think if companies are thinking of moving towards exit at some stage, whether that's next year, in the next 3 to 4 years, one of the most important things that you've got to do is to develop people to run your business for you. Because if you are still the focal point for managing and developing your business, you're still the person or your board are the people that every client recognizes beyond anyone else. That's a great thing, but it has its flip side. The flip side is, how on earth are you going to get out of the business when you sell it? Because you're going to be tied into that business in an earn-out if the business is very, very dependent upon you to lead and develop it. So one of the things you've really got to be thinking about as you start planning towards your exit is the quality of the management, the people that are going to step into your shoes. So succession planning, to use that cliche, becomes extremely important. And I think putting energy, time into learning and development, investment into learning and development for these people becomes absolutely critical, not least because in many instances, the best outcome for you as a business owner is a management buyout, because the business sits with the people that love it. They embody the essence, the culture of the company. And it's a marvelous thing to be able to pass it on to the people you've worked closely with for many, many years and give them that opportunity. So developing those people, I think, becomes very important. And Dave made this point the other day when we were talking about this. It's a really good one. If you're talking to potential purchasers of your business, the likelihood of those people actually meeting in those early stages, the people that are managing your business, is fairly remote. So how do you articulate their abilities, who they are, what they've done, and what they're going to do, taking the business forward? Those things I think are really important. So elevating and profiling and developing the people that work very closely with you, those future leaders, becomes absolutely critical if you're moving towards an exit.
I just got a couple of little bits to add for me. I think being able to demonstrate that as a manager, a management team, or an owner, you have invested back into not just the management team but your people. So, how do you conduct the review process? How detailed are they? How thorough are they? What's the documentation around that? We've talked a lot about the importance of measuring how engaged your people are. So the pulse, things like a pulse survey. When did you last measure the engagement of your people? How much time do the leaders spend with clients? How much time do they spend with the business? Do the leaders currently bill? And if so, what's the plan if they come out of the business? Who's going to pick up that billings going forward? And who runs the company on a day-to-day perspective? What happens if these leaders or the manager or the owner comes out? Who picks up that activity going forward? So those are my sort of top questions that I would be asking if I was considering investing in an agency. I would.
I think if you're growing the business, I think my simple question is: if you walked out of the business for 3 months, would the business still go on an upward trajectory, or would it flatline or tail off? And if it's going to flatline or tail off, then you are going backwards anyway, and therefore you haven't got a management structure that can compete within your business. So I think it's important the quality of management comes in. I think the flip side of that is the quality of the margin that you actually provide from the business, whether it be from a perm sale or from a contract sale or a temp sale. That quality of margin is there. And I remember having these countless arguments at Adecco when we started to talk to the actual finances of the business. Would you rather have £1,000 at 10%, or would you rather have £100 at 20%? And the finance people would rather have £100 at 20% because you're converting more of that £100 into profit. And that is the way they sort of look at that. So the quality of your margin becomes really important. And the flip side of that is what you drop down from your bottom line, your top line onto your bottom line becomes important. So if you're saying from top line to bottom line, you're only dropping, say, 10% to profit from your turnover to profit, what the company's saying is that you're actually not you're over invested in your business. You've invested too much because you're not making enough profit. However, it's the other way around. You might think your business looks healthy because you're dropping, say, from the turnover line 50% becomes profit. What they're saying then, you're under investing in your business. You're not investing enough. So they draw a line around about that 20% mark and then fluctuate up and down depending on what the business looks like. So when you start to look at your business and you start to think about, when we go back to EBITDA, and then you take your tax away from that, what that bottom line pure profit is, if that's around about 20%, your business is in a very, very good position. It's been very, very well run. As soon as it starts getting north of 30%, investors start to worry. As soon as it starts getting south of 15%, they start to panic even more. So the quality of margin of your business, it goes with that quality of management. Don't allow your people to undersell your business with your client base.
So Howard, I mean, I think having a margin target every year that the business is attempting to reach and hold is critical. And in my old business at Office Angels, we used to write into our temps consultants, as we call them, their bonus plans were quarterly margin targets. If they hit those margin numbers, they got paid a certain amount of money. And the reason that we were so keen on this point is that we were always tracking our margins on a weekly basis. I mean, I spent hours and hours every week looking at margins because we had a number. So if we were dealing with very large corporations where typically the margins were low because the volumes were high, we had to balance that by bringing in a broader level of SME business where the volume was very low, but the margins were high, so that our average margin was where we needed it to be. And I would track this, as I say, relentlessly. We also had a KPI that I've always liked, which was that we said that we would never have more than 10% of our turnover attributable to more than 10% of our client base, if that makes any sense. So if we had large corporations who were spending a lot of money with us, which of course we were delighted about, if the percentage of that went above 10%, I got very agitated and we tried to expand our SME base to bring that percentage down. I didn't want to be too dependent upon a small number of very large companies on low margin. So this was always a balancing act. And I think that tracking the quality of your margin and having a belief in holding the line on price is absolutely an imperative.
So I think when you've got to look at that, because you've just sort of stolen the next one as well there, Paul, I think when you look at that, you've got to also think about the perm business. Everyone thinks, oh, it's perm business, it's maybe at 10%, but it's still 10% profit. It's still eroding your overall profit at the end of the day from what you're dropping from the top line to the bottom line. And that has a big problem. So again, you've got to make sure your perm business is still growing and on the upward curve from a margin point of view or a fee point of view. So let's move on to spread of clients. Dave, I'm not sure what Paul's taken from you or from there, but Dave, spread of clients.
I could just give a live example of when I started a business that was supplying Oracle contractors in the southeast, and we went for it. We grew from 5 people to 12 people. We had 2 big clients. We had BT and we had Eurotunnel, and we were very proud of ourselves at these 2 big clients. And we were also very new at running a business, and we just thought we've got to service these clients because we've got to keep going. And at one stage, as Eurotunnel grew, they moved their entire accounts department over to France. We weren't clever enough or quick thinking enough to hire a French speaker, but suddenly we were finding that we were getting paid in 20, instead of 35 days, it was up to 90 to 100 days. And it cost us almost the entire business because we couldn't afford to fund it. The answer was we just didn't have enough clients. We could have addressed that one particular issue, but we didn't have enough clients and we had too many big clients. And if ever you're going to sell a business, when I was buying businesses at Spring, we looked for 15% as our number. Yeah, if the largest client in your portfolio of clients was 15% of your business, we regarded that as quite good. If you had 30%, 25%, 29%, and then a long tail of the rest, that wasn't very good because it's much more dangerous, it much more exposes your business. So it does add to Paul's point earlier that it's better to have a good mix of clients, and this makes sense in any way. It's better to have a good mix of clients. And the final thing I'd say on this is often in your business, you will have a long tail of clients where you may have traded with them once or twice in the last 2 or 3 years and kind of forgotten about them. Someone coming in and looking at your business may look at some of those customers and go, I'm glad they've got a relationship with them. I can do something with that. So actually don't forget about the long tail. Take this opportunity, particularly while we're in situations where we've got a bit more time, to look at your long tail of customers, of clients, and see if you can re-engage with them, because that will help boost the overall mix.
I think this also helps with the fragility of your relationship with your consultants. And I remember having, 2 consultants working for me, and I remember sort of people saying, "Oh, you're so lucky you've got those 2." Both had just nigh on a 20 grand a week contract book. However, one had it out of 1 client, one had it out of about 40 clients. And I'd take that person with 40 clients every single day as the far better business and the far better book, because if her major client dropped out, there wasn't a problem, where if his major client dropped out, his whole business would drop out. And that sort of leads to the sort of thing that I sort of worked on really heavily within sort of that big business and looking at what's going on. I looked at my client base, and I looked at probably 40% of my client base every year needed replacing, or was on a downward curve, or was only making 1 or 2 placements. So every year I look to recycle 40% of my clients constantly by bringing new business in. And that meant having a proper strategy. And as Dave said, they're looking at your lapsed clients, but also having a proper strategy for your current clients, who's on the upward curve, who's on the downward trajectory, but also then looking at a new business strategy on who's going to replace those clients that are on the downward trajectory. If that company's on a downward trajectory and it bounces and it starts to come back up because they're doing the right things, then you've doubled your business because you've got the replacement for that client already. So sat there going, well, it's all right, I've got a really good client, is meaningless, because if that client drops out, you have nothing. So it is about developing constantly that new flow of clients into your business. So if you think about that, 60% of your business remains stable, 40% remains transient, and you've got to replace that transient business from there. And that sort of falls very nicely into our next one, the quality of a relationship, the quality of client relationships. Sharpie.
I think you're absolutely right there. It's 60%, not 6. So I think, you know, in most industries, most sectors, you should be retaining 60% of your client base.
Did I say 6? Sorry.
Yeah, and therefore recycling 40. And I think that's really important to understand that. And I think if you go back, you know, most people, most investors will look for 3 years worth of data. So, you know, they're absolutely right in terms of trends, in terms of the 3 month worth of trend, but they'll look back over the last 3 years and they'll say, you know, what was your client base 3 years ago? How many of those clients did you retain the following year? How many did you lose? And how many new ones did you bring on board? And even right down to consultants. So if you know that you need, you know, 20 new clients a year, what does that mean in terms of the individual target per consultant, and how are you measuring that? So these investors won't let go until they've got evidence or proof that you've actually followed some of the issues through, right through to the core face of the business. So I think that's really imperative and important. From a relationship perspective, I think, you know, it's also about recurring revenues. So, you know, anything around longevity and recurring revenue has got a really high multiple and valuation. So if you're into a contract, which is a 3-year contract, there may be some, you know, break clauses in there or some termination clauses, but getting something that can demonstrate that you've got some longevity is really worthwhile doing. And this is where, and we haven't got time, but this is where it plays into the services. This is why so many people are, you know, chasing down, you know, department functional led, little MSP and little RPO and talent acquisition services, because you'll typically get a 3-year contract out of these services. And you don't have to be a big provider to offer those. And I keep saying that. But, you know, also, and lastly, who is the client lead? So if you look at the top 5 clients in your business, who has got the relationship with the client? How often do you meet them? When was the last service review? What's the documentation? And how do you measure client satisfaction? Are all things that I would be wanting to look into.
And I'd just add to that, Paul, I think, you know, as you say, you're looking for multi-layered account management. Again, we're looking forward and talking about moving towards an exit. And if you're a business owner, then you need increasingly to be moving away, as it were, from being the focal point for clients and replacing yourself with other trusted people in your business. So it's multi-layered. I think that point about trusted as well, we've all constantly talked about trusted advisor status. So developing a relationship with a client to the extent that, and I've used this phrase before, you own the client, that you're very involved and immersed with the client at every level, right up to board level. And you need to, as you rightly said, be able to demonstrate that. The best way of demonstrating that is clearly to have signed up written agreements that are proof that when you've left the business, you've exited the business will retain those contracts and agreements going forward. So making plans to start to sign up clients, to your earlier point, I think is very important. And that again talks to moving away from transactional business into retained and exclusive, or as you put it, RPO, MSP type business.
Yeah.
That moves very nicely onto that sort of next bit when people come and evaluate their business and they look at the client relationship. They also look at the geographical spread of where those clients are. So if your clients are all in the UK, they're thinking, okay, you've got a good UK presence, but that means there's an opportunity to leverage into an international presence and grow an international business. And I always think when you're extending into an international market, because that international market can, inverted commas, safeguard your business. When we're in normal economic times, not the time we're at the moment, different parts of the world are on different economic cycles to yourself. So it could be that the UK is going into a slump where the US market is into a growth period. It could be vice versa. The US market's in a slump where the UK is into a growth period. So it sort of safeguards your business from an economic cycle that revolves around the world. And what we always start to think about is when I talk to clients, well, they say, well, it's really hard to open a international market. I'm saying, well, actually, when you start to think about it, it's quite easy to open an international market. If you look at how many clients you're dealing with, how many clients have got an international market themselves? How many have got an international spread? So if you could get your sponsor to introduce you to the international sponsor, could you springboard across into that marketplace and vice versa? So it's sort of looking about how you grow that market. So it's using your sponsor. And that's when you talk about the quality of your relationship. And I remember being sort of flying under the radar at Adecco because we weren't meant to work outside the UK, but we worked out there were certain countries in Europe that had very little IT marketplace. And we flew under the radar and used our leverage in the UK to introduce you to a company, say, in Belgium. And we then started to supply contracting to Belgium, and then Adecco found out and then took all those contractors off us, but that's not the point. But the point was we used our UK operation to introduce us to the international operation, and we grew a really big international team before we were stopped by Adecco because they wanted to then keep that into their local marketplace. But it says that the international presence is there to be leveraged if you have international clients. So look at your clients. Again, you could be leaving an awful lot on the table because people talk about, should I be going into new niches or different niches, etc. There's an opportunity because you already have the client base. You know how to work in that client base. It's just about then getting the introduction from your clients and then growing a candidate base in that European market and understanding what's going on in that market. Dave, you wanted to talk about this bit as well.
Well, I just think it's important you ask yourself the question as the business leader, why do I want to internationalize my business? What is the purpose of doing it? Is it to grow it, to expand, to get a better value for the business down the line? And then you've got to work that out and look and say, well, if I was going to spend that amount of money on doing that, what if I spent that amount of money in the UK and carried on growing my business in the way that I'm doing it, or adding in an additional service? And there's no right or wrong answer to that question. I would just encourage you as a business leader to sit down and work it out, because it's great to have an international business, but for the first year or two, it can take a while for that business to make money. And if your plan is over the next 3 years to do something with your business, you may not want to invest in internationalization. And one final point I make on this, Europe is not a country, as we know. Europe is 40 odd different countries. And often I will come across business leaders who say, oh, we're in the UK and Europe. Well, what they mean is they're in Germany and they're in France and they're in Spain and they're in Slovakia. And each of those countries has a completely different culture, a completely different way of doing business. And you've got to understand that. When I was at Parity, when I initially took over the European business, I just saw it as UK and Europe. And it was to my detriment that I did that, because I had a steep learning curve to understand how each country did business. And you've got to think about all of those things before you think about internationalizing your business.
So when we talk about that, Dave, because what you're talking about there is how do you become compliant in those type of areas, in those marketplace. Compliance is not just about looking at sort of different countries, about looking about the whole of your business. Compliance becomes a really big talking point, does it not, with regards to when people sort of evaluate your business, Dave?
It does, and this may surprise some of our listeners here, but of the 10 things that go on the arrow here of iPhones that how to put together, if you look at this, compliance is the one that your buyer can take off in the price the most. So I look at the business and I'll go, actually, we'll shave a bit of this here because they haven't got all their contracts in place. We'll shave a bit off here because I've actually had a legal case against them. We'll shave a bit of here because they're not as compliant as they should be on IR35. We'll shave a bit here because they've got all their contracts with RPOs rather than the end client. And suddenly you're sitting there thinking, actually, I've got a really, really good business. It's making £600,000, £1 million, whatever it is. And they've just knocked me down by 50% because I'm not compliant in certain areas. And it's a real way of a buyer getting under the skin of your business and pulling the rug away and going, right, these are areas that are going to cost us in the future. We're going to take that off the price now. So before you enter into thinking about doing something with your business, MBO, whatever it may be, you should do a compliance audit and get a proper risk assessment done and look at where you are potentially needing a bit more assistance.
I think I'd just add to that. I think for me, it's around how you're using technology to automate things and how you're using technology to support compliance and make it more, bulletproof and prevent the errors. Because it's the errors, isn't it, Dave? That or the potential of errors that puts a buyer off in terms of the cost implication of those errors. I think another question just around how invested are you? So, do you have ISO accreditations as an example? What is your process for screening and for vetting? But it's not just compliance from that perspective. It's compliance around your contracts. And by the way, all the REC contracts have been updated. If you haven't updated those, then they're available on the REC website. So are you using the most up-to-date contracts? And are you using all the same contracts? And are you making sure you're collecting your cash in the same way as well? So compliance around collecting cash is also really important.
I think it'd be right in saying, Dave, would I not, is that one of the biggest reasons and the main reasons that sales drop out is because of lack of compliancy.
It absolutely is. And it's the area that your buyer can have the biggest impact on in your discussions. Because whenever you are looking at valuing your business and then entering into some sort of discussion, often those discussions take 3 or 4 months. And the buyer is looking in a forensic detail at everything in your business that often you're not, because you think everything's okay or you've got someone looking at it. So I just encourage everybody to look at where there are areas where you could be more compliant, or if there's gaps, try to fill those gaps if you're about to have.
So as we move on to the final one, the 10th and last one, which is size, I'm going to throw this over to Mr. Jacobs.
Obviously, the tallest person amongst us can talk about size.
I'd let you lead in with that one, Paul.
How many cushions are you sat on today?
Actually, I can say, look, there you go, one. Well, I think, size is kind of an interesting comment about businesses because, of course, there are some very valuable recruitment companies that are relatively small in terms of the number of people that they employ and so forth. But I think that size can really be applied to a whole range of measurements within an organization, obviously around turnover and profit, but also client base. How many clients constantly use your services, both across perm and temp and contract? How many placements do you make, perm placements? How many temporaries do you have out at any given point, or contractors out at any given point? We talked already about margins and so on and so forth. So I think when you're looking at this area, to use the very old cliche, and I'm going to finish on this statement, size matters. And it does in this instance. How are you going to convince somebody to buy your business? Where do you dominate in your market? And how can you quantify that when it comes to somebody walking around your vehicle, kicking tires and working out whether they're going to buy it? So I think these are areas that need to be monitored, measured, and it's something that over a period of time becomes extremely important.
I think one of the things, irrespective of the size of your business, what they do look at is the attrition within that business, and that's your employees and your clients' attrition that they look at, and therefore they look at the stability of the size of that business. So you might be a business of 20 people, but it's a very stable business, then obviously that drives the P up. If it's very unstable and you're forever having to reinvent the wheel either for staff or for new clients, then it becomes a more sort of untenable business. There's sort of things there, and it'll drive the line down. So size is a really important one. So great, guys. We finished almost on time, which is awesome. I thought we were going to struggle there to get those 10 things in, but we've not. Next week, we're going to talk about the intangible assets. So these are the intangible things, the things that you can't see, the things that you can't touch, that can really make a huge difference to your business. So again, we're going to look at how we can add value to your business, because I think at time now, as I said at the beginning, it's about leaving nothing on the table, and it's how do we make your business more valuable by sweating the assets. So thank you very much. As always, please follow us on LinkedIn if you've not already done so. This month, as always, we're offering out our free 60-minute mentor session. So if you've not had one of those sessions, please go onto the website and fill out the form, and we'll get in contact with you to do that. That just leaves to say thank you very much, guys. Stay safe out there, and we look forward to seeing you all next week.
Cheers, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.